Oh, hello everybody. Hey, welcome back to the Veteran Lane YouTube channel here, where we get to talk about VA disability. It's an educational platform provided by myself, your friendly VA accredited attorney, Matthew Lang, here with all my experience inside and outside the VA. In order, well, to make the process so smooth between veterans and VA alike that maybe you don't need me in the future. I mean, don't forget to call, but if you don't need me, that's great. And I look forward to that one day. I really truly do believe that the VA system is much easier than it's made out to be. The disability claim system is really a simple process. Once you understand the rules and the regulations, understand the foundation, and once everything comes together in a meaningful way. Now others may think I'm crazy, and that's fine. But that's what I truly believe. So you're probably going, hey, didn't you wear that shirt last week? Yeah, normally I wear that purple shirt, and I've kind of shedded it for now. But I did film a couple of videos here back to back just to have some time to focus on veterans, your claims, and help more there. So you get to see me in the same shirt, the same, well, gray shirt. Hey, so let's get down to it. We want to talk about, this is another topic. Now, this is a more complex topic. This is another complex topic. I want to give you an idea, veterans, of the presumption of soundness and this presumption of aggravation. Now, VA, I want to give you this too, because I see from my career all the way until I made it to like the Board of Veterans Appeals, where I got misunderstood and probably not applied correctly in most cases. And I see where it's misapplied in cases that come to my desk too still. Again, very complex issue, I think, that we can make simple. So let's start with this presumption of soundness. So what am I talking about? Well, the presumption of soundness is codified in the 38 U.S.C. section 1111. Here's what it states. Every veteran shall be taken to have been in sound condition when examined, accepted, and enrolled for service, except as to defects, infirmities, or disorders noted at the time of the examination, acceptance, and enrollment, where clear and unmistakable evidence demonstrates that the injury or disease existed before acceptance and enrollment and was not aggravated by such service. So, in simple terms, the law presumes that every veteran, so veterans, the law presumes that all of you, every one of you, were healthy when you entered service. You were perfect. Nothing wrong with you. The VA cannot deny service connection for a condition because it existed prior to service unless the VA can overcome this presumption that there was nothing wrong with you at the time you entered service. Now, there's a three-step kind of analytical framework for this. So, the Court of Appeals had established this three-step process for adjudicators to follow when the presumption of soundness is raised. So let me back up a little bit, veterans. Let me make sure that we're all on the same page and that we're tracking. The idea here is that you go in and you file, say, I don't know, a knee condition. Always stick with the simple joints at this point, right? You file a knee condition. You say it was due to your service, that you were in a combat zone, you carried all this extra gear, you were responsible for the M60, you were just the smaller person of the unit, and everybody loaded you up with a couple 100 pounds that you had to ruck for miles in this combat zone in uneven terrain, and before you knew it, your knee was just in a lot of pain every day, all day. There was no medics around, and all you could do is bear through the pain. So you feel that your right knee, in this case, your right knee, or your knee condition, left knee perhaps, is ultimately due to your service. Well, but what maybe you don't realize is there's something documented in your service treatment records or in your medical records, private medical records or VA medical records even, that indicate that this right knee injury, or maybe this left knee injury, actually began prior to your service. So this is where we have to start applying this presumption of soundness and presumption of aggravation rules to determine, were you presumed sound because it wasn't documented on your enlistment records, your entrance exam. So therefore it had to be directly related to service. Or does the evidence somehow show a clear indication that this condition existed prior to your service? And then we have to look towards the aggravation side of stuff. Okay, I'm not sure how simplified I just made that. But again, it's the idea of, was it documented before you went to service? Was it documented at all? Did it exist before service? Was it pre-existing? Those are the key terms we should rely on. Was it pre-existing? All right, let's get back to this three-step analysis here. So here's the steps. Step one. Was the condition noted upon entry into service? If yes, so BA, if yes, the presumption of soundness does not apply because it is documented. The veteran is considered to have entered service with that condition then. So veterans, this is kind of what I was trying to explain. If it is documented on your entrance exam, when you joined service, when you went through the MEPS, then the presumption of soundness for you doesn't apply. You had this injury before you entered service. So now the analysis then is going to shift to the rules of aggravation, which we'll discuss in the second part of this. So keep that in mind. But now, VA, what if when you look at that entrance examination, it doesn't list the claimed condition? So the claimed condition is not noted on that entrance exam. Now the presumption of soundness applies. The presumption of soundness being the condition is presumed to not have existed at enlistment. If this is the case, VA, keep in mind the burden then shifts to you to rebut the presumption. Now, when we look at this as a whole, we got to really start picking out some of the terminology. What does noted mean? So the defect must be clearly recorded on the enlistment examination documents. Ambiguous or insufficient notations may not be enough to defeat the presumption. Now, I'm mentioning this because I see this on decisions that come across my desk. I have seen VAU try to say that it existed on the enlistment examination, except the condition that's listed there is very obviously medically completely different from the condition being claimed. So you have the burden now to show whether the condition existed or not. But keep in mind, noted, meaning that a defect must be clearly recorded. And that's just one problem that we've seen, is it's not always the case when VAU say it existed prior to service, because it was documented on entrance exam when it was a whole different condition. Now, moving to step two, can the VA rebut the presumption with clear and unmistakable evidence? The CUE. Another point of contention for me, because I think the word CUE and clear and unmistakable evidence are completely misunderstood year after year, and even when I was working in the VA, always misunderstood. But let's give it a try. If the presumption applies, so the presumption of soundness applies, VA must present clear and unmistakable evidence that the condition both existed prior to service and was not aggravated by service. So this is an extremely high standard of proof. It's not enough for the VA to show it is likely or as likely as not. We move to a higher standard of proof that the condition pre-existed. The evidence must be undebatable, positive, and unequivocal. I knew I was going to mess that up. Work with me. My tongue gets twisted sometimes, you know? Point is, higher standard. Higher standard for the VA. So, the courts have said this. The Federal Circuit Court has held that the medical evidence that is merely speculative or that only suggests a pre-existing condition does not meet the CUE standard. The evidence must be conclusive. So what are we talking about? This is what we see from UVA. This is where I think the confusion lies, is the veteran goes in without this condition being documented at entrance. Presumption of soundness applies. At some point down the road, there might be a medical questionnaire, a periodic health assessment even, that the veteran goes, you know, I didn't remember it back then, but it's kind of come to my attention that I did have this, say, knee condition or this condition that's being claimed when I was a young child playing sports, for example, or at some point prior to service. That statement alone, the courts have said, does not meet that higher level of standard and proof to show the condition clearly existed and unmistakably existed prior to service. And that pre-existed. I mention this because I even see the VA examiners mess this up. They'll be like, well, there's documentation of it, clearly existed. Check the box. It's not the way the law works. You still have a higher burden of proof to show if it truly did exist prior to service. Because let's say the veteran did say in the childhood, and it was 10 years ago before they joined service. Sure, it pre-existed, but did it still exist at the time they entered service or shortly there before? Did it truly still exist? Higher burden, higher burden. All right, step 3. If rebutted, does another theory of service connection apply? So see, this is one thing that we run into as well, veterans and VA. We find ourselves running around blinders on a lot of stuff we do. And VA, I feel you do that too. And I don't think it's intentional, especially in these cases. I think it's the misunderstanding of the rule. So even if VA you successfully rebut the presumption, very rare occurrence, honestly, the claim is not necessarily denied. The adjudicator must then consider whether the pre-existing condition was aggravated during service, which leads us to the second set of rules. So this is important, VA, because I find that as soon as the examiner says it clearly, or they check that box and say clearly existed prior to service and don't give any good rationale or explanation that fits legal authority, you will write on that decision some sort of canned text, likely that says denied because it existed prior to service. But you're not done. The analysis goes on. There's another rule. The rule of aggravation. It's part number 2 in our talk here. The rule of aggravation. So the rules of aggravation are, again, codified in the 38 U.S.C. 1153. Here's what it states. A pre-existing injury or disease will be considered to have been aggravated by active military service where there's an increase in disability during such service, unless there's a specific finding that the increase in disability is due to the natural progression of the disease. Now, this statute creates a presumption if a pre-existing condition worsens during service, it is presumed to have been aggravated by service unless the VA can prove otherwise. So let's take apart the framework here. To establish service connection by aggravation, the veteran must show, 1, the condition pre-existed service, either because it was noted at entry or the VA rebutted the presumption of soundness. 2, the condition increased in severity, aggravated during service. This requires comparing the level of disability at enlistment with the level at separation. Medical evidence or clinical records showing a worsening are crucial at this point. And 3, the increase in disability was not due to the natural progression of the condition. Once the veteran shows an increase in disability during service, the burden shifts to the VA to rebut the presumption of aggravation. So this is where we see the VA go wrong too, because VA will put that burden back on the veteran. when they have the burden of proof now. And if you can't meet that burden, VA, what you're going to find here is the case and claim automatically is service connected at this point. So when it comes to rebutting the aggravation presumption, the VA can only defeat the aggravation presumption by providing clear and unmistakable evidence that the worsening was due to the natural progression of the disease. Natural progression is defined. The worsening would have occurred at the same time and the same degree, even if the veteran had not been in military service. And that gets very, very hard to show because military pushes you through a much more rigorous physical regiment, has you wear combat boots, adds weight to your body with gear, and so many other things. Where the civilian life never would have done that. So, natural progression means the worsening would have occurred at the same time and the same degree, even if the veteran had not been in military service. And a whole explanation is going to be needed there to justify. Now, the courts have said that the federal circuit actually itself has some cases out there where they've held that the VA, to rebut the aggravation presumption, it must provide medical evidence, not just lay statements or speculation that clearly and unmistakably demonstrates the natural progression of the disease. So the absence of evidence of a specific in-service injury is not enough. And this is what we see all the time, probably nearly all the time. Examiners will say that there's no medical evidence to show that it was aggravated, so thus it could not be aggravated. VA, the second you see any opinion that says there was no documentation in service and that's the reason for justification, that is inadequate across the board on so many different levels, on so many different issues, and including here. The absence of evidence of a specific in-service injury is not enough to refute that presumption of aggravation, or to say it clearly and unmistakably existed prior to service. So let me try to help you out, VA, because that's what I want to do here. I want to make it easier. When it comes to drafting your decisions, you must walk through a framework logically. Here's a common scenario. The Veteran Service Treatment Records do not contain any notation of the claim condition. We've been using a knee. Let's call it a knee condition. At the time of enlistment, therefore, boom, presumption of soundness applies. Now, the VA must now present clear and unmistakable evidence that the condition both pre-existed in service and was not aggravated by service. So, if you're trying to say that it existed in service because there's some other annotation or notation of it later on after entrance, you now have the burden VA to prove the present clear and unmistakable evidence that the condition both pre-existed in service and was not aggravated by service. It's got to be a whole explanation going on there. The evidence of record. You've got to describe the evidence. Post-service medical opinions. Speculating about a pre-existing condition. It's not clear and unmistakable by itself because it's, well, speculative. It's inconclusive. So therefore, VA, you would have failed to rebut your presumption of soundness if that's all you rely on. So if that's the case, if you fail VA to rebut the presumptions, service connection is granted. Done. Veteran is connected for the condition. Now let's say presumption of soundness is rebutted or doesn't apply. So veterans, your enlistment examination notes the condition that you're claiming, even if it is a right knee or left knee at this point. Therefore, the presumption of soundness does not apply because it's documented, right? Now, or the VA has presented a clear and unmistakable evidence at this point that the condition pre-existed service. So if the VA truly is able to, which I would say is such a slim chance of all my experience to be able to do, that the condition unmistakably existed prior to service, even if it's not documented on the entrance exam, then the presumption of soundness is not going to apply. The analysis is now going to turn to the aggravation rule underneath 38 U.S.C. 1153 as our presumption of aggravation. The evidence shows that the condition increased in severity during service. Well, then there's got to be a citation of medical evidence comparing entry and exit exams or in-service treatment records. Therefore, a presumption of aggravation would arise then. The VA must present clear and unmistakable evidence that the increase was due to the natural progression of the disease. The evidence of record, let's say, fails to meet this high standard because no medical opinion addresses natural progression or evidence is not conclusive. Therefore, the presumption of aggravation is not rebutted, leading to the conclusion that service connection for aggravation of the pre-existing condition is granted. So we're looking at direct and aggravation in service. So I know this can still be complicated and we might still be lost in the weeds with some of this. I tried to simplify this a little bit more. I think the biggest key takeaways are going to be scrutinizing the listening examination for any notations, carefully analyzing medical evidence, medical opinions to see if there truly is any clear and unmistakable evidence. And that's not merely speculative that the condition existed prior to service. Can't be relying on checkboxes, can't be relying on inadequate medical opinions. Got to analyze all the evidence. Don't skip steps in the analyzing. It's legally sufficient decision if you explicitly address each part of the analysis that we talked about. You got to walk through the whole discussion. Why does presumption of soundness exist? Why does it not exist? What's the clear and unmistakable reason? How about the presumption of aggravation? Have you met the burden of proof? Is there more than just a lack of documentation? Is it part of the natural progression or of the civilian world, not the military world? You really got to talk about things. You got to go through everything. You've got to follow the test, VA. You got to explain it all out. You got to use the correct burden. And like I said, we've seen that multiple times where the incorrect burden is used. You got to remember the burden is on the VA to rebut both presumptions with clear and unmistakable evidence. The veteran does not have to prove they were sound or that aggravation was not due to natural progression. And as always, VA, you got to explain your reasoning. A conclusionary statement is not enough, and that's usually what we see in these cases as well. And I'll send it back to you. Explain why the evidence does or does not meet the high standard. Cite specific medical records and explain their limitations. Be detailed. Explain. Apply the rules, apply the regulations. Court-mandated frameworks. And then you'll ultimately be drafting a decision that is both fair to the veteran and legally defensible. In other words, to make it harder for guys like me to tell you you're wrong. So, this is presumption of soundness. This is presumption of aggravation. This is probably the most simple way I can do it right now in explaining a pre-existing condition. So veterans, understand if you do see in your decision that the VA claims that the condition pre-existed service, that there are so many other rules and it can be a very complex setup to understand, and that you might want to, again, seek representation if you're not comfortable doing it on your own. VSOs, VA accredited agents, and other attorneys like myself, all out here doing what we can to help you out. So with that, thank you everybody again for watching another video, and I will see you next Tuesday where we'll do this all again and we will talk about more VA disability. Have a wonderful day.